Housekeeping. May I remind everyone present this meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a committee member wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up if they can be seen, or use the raise hand function? If a committee member raises their hand via the function and is not subsequently invited to speak by the chair, please could they turn their camera on to indicate or place a message in the chat function. When invited to address by the chair, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this is not possible for any reason, please bring this to the attention of myself and or Democratic Services Officer as soon as possible. If required, participants can dial into the meeting using a telephone. If for any technical reason any party to the proceedings is unable to hear, then the hearing will be adjourned for a short time to allow contact to be made. It's important to remember that all parties must hear all the proceedings unless they themselves decide to leave. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function. For the sake of the recording, the chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and or to grab the attention of the chair or Democratic Services Officer only. Right, so this is the Special Planning Committee meeting, which is the deferred decision meeting following the discussion we had on Model Farm some weeks ago now. First of all, before we do start the meeting, may I offer my condolences and the condolences of the rest of this committee to Councillor Ernest for his sad bereavement a few weeks ago, and wish him well. I see he's on the call, but I wanted to pass that on. So, starting the meeting, Mark, any apologies for absence?
I've not had any directly through, Chair. I don't know if members have got any to offer.
See no hands. Part 2 of the agenda to receive.
I believe you said a few words.
I can hear someone speak.
Councillor Ernest.
Anthony, you're trying to. We can barely hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can now, yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Could I just say I think he was saying something, but unfortunately my headset and the microphone on the laptop cut out at the appropriate moment.
Right. Well, the first thing was I offered I don't know if you heard it. I offered the committee's condolences and my personal condolences to yourself for your recent bereavement, and I just wanted that to be recorded. I then asked for declarations of interest and received none. So moving on, then we come on to the report of the appointed external consultant, which I think you should all have had the sight of. And I'll ask Rob actually to introduce this now, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can everyone hear me?
So yeah, I should actually first introduce to
Yes,
anybody who hasn't met them. Rob Chichester is from the Architects Town Environmental and Urban Design Town Planners people, and Annabelle, who's also on the call, Annabelle Paul, who's also on the call, is an external legal advisor on this matter. So Rob, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thomas. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Chichester. I'm a Chartered Town Planner and Director at CTJ Architects and Town Planners. I've been retained by the authority to provide independent planning advice to members regarding the planning application at Model Farm, which was presented before members at Planning Committee meeting on the 1st of March 2023. Members will be aware that a vote took place in respect of a motion in support of the officer's recommendation to approve the application, which was defeated. It was subsequently agreed by the committee that the application would be deferred to allow further consideration of the reasons for refusal of the application. In the interim period, the applicants submitted an appeal to Planning and Environment Decisions Wales, PEDW, citing the reasons for the appeal as failure of the LPA to give its decision within an appropriate period on an application for planning permission. The submission of the appeal against non-determination means that any formal decision on the application has now been taken out of members' control and is within the jurisdiction of PEDW. Notwithstanding the above, members must now determine whether they wish to defend the authority position at appeal and, if so, on what basis. If a motion is passed to defend the appeal, members need to table the specific reasons for refusal they would have provided had they had the opportunity to determine the application. Alternatively, members may decide that they do not wish to defend the appeal, which means that a decision will be taken by PEDW on the material planning merits of the submitted appeal, having regard to any other objections from interested third parties, but without involvement by the LPA. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rob. Annabelle, is there anything you want to contribute?
Not at this stage, thank you.
Thank you. We have, so we need, we need to open now to discussion on first on whether we are going to defend the appeal and on what grounds if we decide to do so. Councillor Wilson, you have your hand up first.
Yeah, I got a question before we come to that decision.
Sure.
On obviously we were given a couple of choices there, and obviously the second choice seems to be that we don't honour what we've already said we do as a planning committee. And my question would be, if we do not do that, is there a precedent for doing this? That's the first question. And second question is that if we decide not to defend it, will we actually reduce our potential costs if we have that approach? If we lose an appeal because we don't do anything, you see what I mean?
I understand that. I was just wondering who of our three experts, James, Robert, or Annabelle, would like to reply to that.
Well, I'm happy to reply, as nobody else seems to have jumped in straight away. But do contribute, Robert and James, if you feel I'm getting anything wrong. First of all, in terms of the decision that's already been made at the previous meeting, my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, James, is that the motion was to defer consideration of the application. It wasn't to refuse it. So there hasn't actually been, as I understand it, a formal decision of the authority to refuse the application. It was there was obviously talk about refusing it and debate about that at that meeting, but the actual motion was to defer the decision. And then in the meantime, the developer appealed against non-determination and so took the matter out of the local authority's hands. So if you are minded today to decide not to defend the appeal, you wouldn't be acting wholly contrary to any previous decision that has been made, because, as I say, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that the decision was simply to defer determination of the application, not to refuse it. So that's the first point. In terms of costs, so on an appeal, the normal position is that any party will bear their own costs. So if the council were to actively play a role in that appeal process, they would bear the costs of doing that. If they didn't actively play a role in the process, they wouldn't have any costs, or very minimal costs, because they wouldn't be putting in evidence, they wouldn't be attending a hearing or an inquiry or those kind of things. The only situation in which one party can be liable for another party's costs is if that party has behaved unreasonably in the context of the appeal process. So we need to be mindful of that in any decisions we make and make sure that we are acting reasonably. Now, as I say, there hasn't been a decision to refuse the application. There's only been one to defer the application, and the appellant has now appealed. So the decision today is either to say we're not going to defend the appeal and we'll just let that process take its course. There may be other parties who there may be other parties who are objecting to the development who may wish to resist it. So, you know, it doesn't mean it's a foregone conclusion that it will be successful. That would be a matter for the inspector, bearing in mind all of the evidence. But we would simply say it's not something that we are actively resisting. And in that situation, I can't see how that would be unreasonable, given where we are. If, on the other hand, we decide we do want to defend it, we need to be sure that the reasons why we are defending it are ones that have sufficient substance and merit to mean that they're not wholly unarguable and not unreasonable reasons. So that's important, because in that situation, if we were to go through and defend it on a ground which the inspector said was really hopeless, then we could be liable for paying the appellant's costs as well as our own.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. James or Roberts, is there anything else you wish to add or correct on that?
I was just going to come in just sort of for a point of clarification for members' purposes. Obviously, there was a vote where we had a motion for approval of the scheme in accordance with officers' recommendations, which was defeated. But it's one of these strange quirks of the planning process whereby a vote not to approve isn't a vote to refuse, because you need a separate motion and vote on refusal with reasons to counteract it. So whilst we didn't vote for it, we didn't have a vote to refuse it. So just to clarify.
Yeah, thank you. So as I say, we've not made a decision, or we didn't make a decision to refuse it. We didn't make it. The only decision we made was we're not approving it now, and a decision to defer. So I don't think that would preclude you from now saying we are not going to actively contest the appeal.
Well, thank you for that, Annabelle. Thanks, James. We have a number of hands up. Next on my list is Councillor Buckley. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. And the thing that I wasn't sure on, as I read it in the stuff we were sent, and as you said it then, Rob, as I understand it, whether we defend this or not, the decision is out of our hands either way, and it goes to PEDU. So yes, if it's going to PEDU either way, I don't see why we should risk having to pay money to defend something which the decision's out of our hands anyway.
Yes, so you're absolutely correct that the decision is now with PEDU and the appointed inspector, not with the authority anymore. And the inspector will make a decision having regard to all of the evidence. But the question is simply whether we want to contribute to that, that argument to be had before the inspector as an authority to say, if we had made a decision, we would definitely have refused it, and it would have been for these reasons, and we'd then put forward evidence on whatever those reasons are, which the inspector would then consider in making their decision. So that's what we need to decide, whether we wish to do that today, or whether we wish to say it's out of our hands now. We're simply not going to play a part in that process, and we'll leave it to the inspector to determine.
Thanks for clearing that up. Cheers.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Annabelle. Next is Councillor Bruce. Gillian.
Yes, first of all, they're talking about this
Gillian,
8-week.
I was trying to find you on the camera. Sorry, I just found you. Go on.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, yeah, computer. They talked about 8 weeks that we did not make a decision or whatever it was they're looking for within 8 weeks. and talking about some legislation, but where is the legislation? What are they talking about? Why has this not been brought to our attention before? And secondly, I understood that we voted to refuse the application.
No. As has just been explained.
No, it wasn't explained. I'm sorry. My understanding
can I finish? Gillian, Councillor Bruce, I was replying to you. It was what was just explained to us by Annabelle was that we vote. The motion before us at the start was to support officers' recommendations. That the vote went against that. So we voted not to support officers' recommendations. We then voted to defer our decision to give us time to consult with external consultants to come up with reasons and so forth. Not come up with reasons, but to understand the reasons that were being put forward by members of the committee who were not in favour of this development. That meant that no decision on refusal was made at that meeting. We subsequently had the meeting where we were briefed on the options, on the various possible decisions and possible reasons, and the strengths of those various possibilities and weaknesses of those, and which ones had merit and which ones had no merit and which had some merit. Perhaps is a better way of saying it. So no decision was made at that meeting other than not to support officers' recommendations, which is not a refusal of the application. Does that make it clear? Does that make it clear?
No, not really, because I voted to refuse it. But what's this 8-week rule that was talked about?
Okay, so local authorities have 8 weeks to make a decision on a planning application.
Where is the legislation for this?
It's in the Development Management Procedure Order. I have to find the exact regulation for you, but it's in the legislation.
We're not aware of it. Yeah.
Okay, well, I can certainly.
No. I'm not worried. Yeah. If it is written down, that's fine. Yeah. What I'm saying is we are not aware of it.
You have an 8-week period. Obviously, you can take longer than that. Right. But once you get to the end of the 8 weeks, the developer is entitled to appeal against non-determination.
Okay.
So some developers may say, okay, we know you're taking a bit longer and we'll wait for you. Fine.
Right.
But other developers may say, we're not waiting any longer, we're appealing. And that's their right to do that.
Okay. Thank you for that.
James, you have your hand up. You wanted to comment on this as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the reason, I think it probably is something that's in the training, but it wouldn't necessarily be something that would come to that planning committee members necessarily need to be aware of, because it's something that the planning officers will control. So most applications would take more than 8 weeks, especially the larger applications that need consultation, etc. So it's fairly standard practice for the planning officers to agree to extensions of time with the developer, and those extensions of time then take forward that date for decision. And most of the time you wouldn't get to a point where there was a non-determination appeal, because the LPA would take the relevant necessary amount of time, and anything that would come to committee within the time frame that had been agreed.
Thank you, James. Rob, just you put your hand up, or has James just covered it?
James has just covered it. Yeah, it's just sort of just confirm that element of it, that you generally it wouldn't come before committee. A non-determination it would be dealt by the officers themselves. It's only the fact that the interim period, the applicants themselves have submitted an appeal that it's come before the committee.
Thank you, Rob. Right, Christine Cave, Councillor Cave, you have your hand up next.
Thank you, Chair. I'll lower my hand so that I don't leave it raised. I note that when you as Chair just spoke about what happened at the last meeting, you were very careful about your choice of words. And I do think that we are, to some extent, playing with semantics here. I don't agree with what Annabelle Paul has said at all. There was a vote, there was a decision, and yes, it was on a motion to support the application. But actually what happened after that was rather confusing, especially for us members that had decided that we were against the applicant or application. For us, we were asked immediately by members of this committee to tell us what our reasons were. And several members of the committee came up with very good reasons why they had decided, as members of this planning committee, to vote against approval of this application. We were then told that that wasn't sufficient, and that in that moment we couldn't put forward our reasons for refusal. Now, having been a member of this committee a little bit longer than Gillian, I can tell you that we have had items brought to committee before where the applicant has said that they're out of time, as we are out of time as an authority. And we have been asked as a committee to retrospectively vote on whether, if the applicant hadn't gone to appeal, whether we would have, as a committee, voted for and against. And what I can't quite understand is, A, why we're not discussing today what our decisions for refusal were at the last meeting, and why we're being asked to actually say whether we're going to defend an appeal or not, because that's most uncommon. I can't say over the last 5 years that I can recall one item that has come before this committee where the committee has voted against officers' recommendations, where we have then had to have a second vote, where members have then had to refuse. Because it's quite clear that if an application doesn't stand up in the committee, in other words, if there are not enough councillors that wish the application to go forward, then it naturally falls. And that's what's happened time and time again in this committee. So I do think to some extent we are very much talking about semantics, and we're very much being coerced, coaxed, cajoled, whatever word you like to use, into deciding that as a committee we will not defend this appeal. And I think that is wrong, because members of the committee clearly stated at the last meeting when this item came before us that we were against this item. And I think we should today stand by our convictions as a committee. What we shouldn't be doing is we shouldn't be considering the financial aspect or any other aspect of it, because time and time again on this committee we are told that we have to look at something on the merits of the plans, on what is before us. We mustn't consider whether it's on the edge of a cliff and it might slip over. Well, that's down to the engineers. We're told that we mustn't think about, how much money it's going to be sold for, or any of those other things. What we have to concern ourselves is the planning merits. And the planning merits of this were discussed at the last meeting, and it was decided at the last meeting that we wouldn't agree with this application. For me, there has never been, in any of the meetings where we've discussed this, the past 2 meetings, there's never been a clear argument put forward as to why there is a case for need for this development. And surely any development rises and falls at the first outset on whether there is a case for need. And I don't believe there is a case for need. I think post-COVID, we are absolutely awash with developments of this type, which are standing empty. I do not believe that we actually need an aviation offices next to an airfield, because I actually believe that if you work for the aviation industry, you by and large know what a plane looks like. And if you don't, you pretty much find out pretty quickly. So I don't think there's a case for need for this. I think as a committee, we should stand by our previous decision, because we did make a decision and we did vote on that decision. And that's what we've got to decide as a committee. We've not got to be coerced or cajoled to think about anything else.
The reason I was being very careful with my choice of words, and you're quite right, I was trying to be very careful with my choice of words, is that we are in something of a legal cleft stick. And we need, I'm conscious of the need that I have to be careful with the way in which I use language because this meeting will probably be part of any evidence that goes to PEDU on the appeal, and will therefore be taken into consideration. So precise language is in fact important. I noticed that you use quite precise language, Christine, in your submission just then, quite rightly. I have both James and Robert wanting to come in on that as well. So James first, and then Robert.
Yeah, I just want to be really clear. I don't think, and what it's not being suggested that the intentions of the committee at the last meeting weren't clear. That is not what we are saying. What we are saying is, as a matter of fact and a matter of law, there has not been a decision taken to refuse the application. There was a vote on whether to support the officer's recommendation that the application be approved. As I've explained, in planning, that does not constitute. Whilst I understand in the logical sense of things, if you've got two options and you say no to one option, then the obvious thing is you're selecting the other option. Because of the way that planning is set up, because of the need to give explicit reasons for refusal of an application, we did not have a vote on the refusal and the reasons for refusal, and the vote was made to defer the application in order that consideration could be given to those reasons for refusal to come to this meeting, which is where we're at now. I don't think there's any suggestion that that we're trying, that there's anything that we're going straight to a vote on this. There will be adequate time for people to debate things. The reasons that were put forward in the previous meeting have been noted, and I would suspect will be repeated by those in favour of both refusal and contesting the appeal. In relation to the note in relation to whether to contest the appeal or not, the committee asked for independent town planning and legal advice. The independent town planner and the independent lawyer have just provided you with what the options are, what your options are. You can do, as a committee, you can make whatever motions you like and you can vote on whatever you like and you can make your decisions. No one's trying to cajole or coerce. The options are being put there for you by the independent experts that you asked for in order that you can make your decision and be best informed. So that was that point. I think there was another, but I can't remember what it was.
No,
sorry.
Thank you, James. Robert, you wanted to come in as well?
Yes, Councillor Keith, just as James pointed out, our advice is wholly independent, and it would be advice I would give anyone in this situation. I think there's one key element of this is probably missed, maybe just in translation or just because of the period between the committee on there. The circumstances have changed since that committee because the appellant. Because the applicant has submitted an appeal, the circumstances have changed in essence on there. So we have to provide advice based on the changes in circumstances, in the fact now that it's been taken out of the authority's control in essence on there. So we are giving you a summary of my independent planning advice on there and Annabelle's advice and the actions that you now need to take on there. And like I said, it is completely up to the members to make those decisions, but we need to ensure that we have given you correct advice on there and transparent advice for you to enable you to make those decisions.
Thank you, Rob.
Sorry, Chair, could I just come back on that last point?
Yes.
That was made about the circumstances have changed. Yes, they have indeed changed because the applicant has gone to appeal, and we do understand that, and that does occasionally happen. But what I said previously is that when that does happen, and it has happened quite recently, I think about the case in Bombleston, for example, where negotiations broke down between officers of the council and the applicant. And what was actually brought to committee was a decision about what we would have done had we had the opportunity before the applicant went to appeal to make the decision, and that's what we were asked to vote on. So it's slightly strange to me that that same process only took place maybe 4, 5, 6 months ago, and now we're being asked to do something different. In actual fact, if as a committee we had been allowed last meeting to have allowed our decisions as a committee to stand, we wouldn't be in this position that we're in now.
If you recall, Councillor Cave, the difficulty was that the planning officers of the council were unable to continue to advise us on the particular matter because we had turned down their recommendations, which they'd given in their best professional judgment, and they felt bound by their professional standards to then be able to not then be able to continue to support. So we needed then to go outside to talk to, in this case, Annabelle and Rob about what we were doing and how we were going to do it, and the kind of reasons, the explicit reasons for,
yes, I do,
refusal.
yeah, I do understand that, Chair, but you obviously understand my point that at the last meeting, the members of the committee that voted against this application were more than clear about their reasons for refusal, and would have been happy at that point if those reasons had been used. What I think as a committee we thought was going to happen at that stage is that you were going to bring in outside experts that were going to help us to be able to put forward those reasons in an argued and a well-argued way. But that isn't exactly what's happened here, and that's why I'm finding this meeting particularly difficult.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. But the fact, and that was the original intention at the end of that meeting. The fact that the applicants have since put in the appeal against non-determination means that those circumstances beyond our control as a committee have changed, and which is why we're now in the position we're in. So moving on, Councillor Perks, your hand is next up on my list. Sandra.
Thank you, Chair. And I was just going to sort of reiterate something that you've just said, Chair, in that, you know, at that meeting where people were putting forward their reasons for refusal, we hadn't had the external support. We didn't have the external support there to guide us on those refusals that were put forward. I just wondered if I could ask a question, and I don't know whether this is useful or not. If we've actually had this on our local development plan, does that weaken our arguments for arguing against it at all? I just wondered if the legal people here could sort of give me some advice on that. If the council has sort of identified this area as part of the local development plan, then what our refusal, where do we stand?
Rob, Annabelle, James?
Yeah,
Annabelle,
well,
probably.
I think that is something that Robert and I did consider, bearing in mind the debate that was had at the last meeting, particularly around need. And our view is that where you have a site that has been allocated in the local development plan, the need is almost a given through the plan. Obviously, if you were to revise the plan during the plan examination, you may argue that it's not needed and therefore should be taken out. But your current extant plan has it there. And so for that reason, we didn't think it was sustainable to undermine the plan essentially by saying there isn't a need for this development. Need may come into other factors, but we didn't think that it could be a freestanding reason for refusal. There's no policy requirement for there to be a need. On the contrary, it's almost implicit that there is a need for it, whether or not that's right or not, because it's allocated in the plan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just a further point on that element on there. The adopted LDP has obviously gone through a robust examination on there, and additionally there's been annual reviews of the LDP as well, which have been found sound. on there. So again, it has been assessed by Welsh Government in essence on there in terms of the soundness of the plan, which they consider acceptable on the annual reviews as well. So just as a point of fact and matter in essence on there.
Thank you, Rob. Next hand I've got up is Councillor Johnson. Ian.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the previous speakers. I think I don't think that my understanding of the position that we're in has changed. I mean, we had a vote at the meeting in March, which was to accept. We decided not to accept, and therefore we took the option of a cooling off period to determine the reasons that we would give for rejection. That is standard. In fact, I believe that's actually Welsh Government's guidance, is that when something goes against officer's recommendation, that you do that and you come back to a following meeting, a later meeting, and you agree that. And in fact, we've done that several times in recent months, where what simply happened is that instead of there being a second vote, when those reasons for rejection are brought forward, we've tended to go forward unanimously as a committee because the committee's intention was made clear at that time. Similarly, as Councillor Cave says, there are occasions in the past where we've had an item brought to planning committee, which has already been sent to what was then the planning inspectorate, now PEDU, but has been on the basis of non-determination, but has been brought to us so that we can give reasons on our position. Interestingly, those are usually given because the council, the local planning authority, was going to refuse them. I mean, it's obviously up to the appellants, how they wish to deal with this. This is a quasi-regulatory system, not a democratic one. I think that I'm happy with the process that we've followed so far. Obviously, this is not all in our hands, but it is up to us to decide what the next steps might be. For me, it would be strange, having had the discussion at planning and having taken what is a de facto, if not de jure decision. Apologies if I get the terms wrong here. I'm sure James will correct me. But having fundamentally just made a clear decision in public as to our direction of travel, it would seem strange for me for us not to make those points in some format. Now, what's interesting then is that there's one reason to say yes, there's many reasons to say no, and having a majority of people who are opposed to something doesn't mean that all of those people necessarily agree with the same points or would make the same things when discussed, when challenged. For myself and for several others, I'm going to come back to some of the points made by Annabelle and Robert about the LDP in a moment. The issue for me is regarding the tension that I see between this application and the climate emergency and nature emergencies that have been declared by Welsh Government and by the Vale of Glamorgan Council. I believe that they go, therefore, against the policies that are being put forward and enacted by both of those bodies, one of which ultimately, of course, includes the Minister for Climate Change, who is responsible for PEDU, and in other occasions will be taking decisions on matters similar to this. I believe, therefore, that actually represents a fundamental change in the circumstances which we find ourselves since the 2011-26 local development plan was passed by this council and was inspected for soundness by the inspector at that point. And I don't believe that our officers have paid sufficient attention to the requirements of Welsh Government policy, Vale of Glamorgan Council policy, in bringing this forward and making representations for approval. And therefore, I believe that it's on those grounds that we should be rejecting and asking the inspector at PEDU to test whether or not those considerations have been taken into account. I'm well aware of previous discussions and briefings with Annabelle Paul and with Robert Chichester about the issues that they've brought forward and suggested might be possible avenues for us to consider. They're not the avenues which I raised in the previous meeting. They are not necessarily things to which I would myself sign up. I'm reminded of a different controversial and technical application that this council has been dealing with, where Annabel Paul, wrote a review of how the council had engaged and determined that the council had followed this is regarding the Barry biomass, of course, the incinerator, and concluded that the council had done planning officers had done what was expected of them. Only then for Welsh Government, for the Minister to turn around and say, actually, we should have done something different in 2015 rather than what we did, which knocks all of that work, sort of out of phase, because we have to go back and look again. I believe this is in the same boat. Welsh Government have changed their position as a result of the climate emergency in 2019. So is the Vale of Glamorgan Council on both climate and nature. And I don't believe that those have been taken fully into consideration in determining this. And I believe that we should be asking the inspector to consider that, because testing that is the only way in which we will know the limits of Welsh Government's own edicts on this, the Vale Council's own policy on this. And it's the only way which we will get, I think, guidance on a wider basis. This is probably the most controversial application regarding climate change, potential climate change, that this planning committee will deal with under the current local development plan. I believe that should be tested, and I believe Welsh Government should also be considering their position on this, because if this is allowed through, then I don't see where the limits come in terms of planning and that climate emergency that they've declared. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Perry is my next hand up here.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to those who have spoken before, and interesting, and I take note. I think that a number of members of the committee would have wished that the advice we had at the last meeting was better. Perhaps there was a slight lack of balancing in the report, where we could have swayed it. There seemed to be a lack of preparation for a vote of refusal, which is partly why we've ended up here, and as well as that, the applicant is perhaps being a bit impatient and pushing things forward, which I'll come to in a second. We keep being told about a robust LDP, but that was an LDP that was designed around planning policy 9, I believe, and we're now in planning policy 11. Things have moved on. The world's moved on from our LDP policies, and we have a site in Monwalston that's only 25% complete after 5 years of building. So there are issues around the LDP that everyone seems to want to cover over. One thing that's not been mentioned today, or I didn't quite hear it maybe, is there's now an appeal for non-determination. Now, had things gone differently at the previous meeting and we voted to refuse and given reason to refuse because we had a more balanced document in front of us, what exactly is the difference between an appeal for non-determination that goes to PEDWA and an appeal against refusal that goes to PEDWA?
Shall I answer that?
Yeah, Annabel, yeah, please.
So if you had refused it, and there would have been reasons for refusal, then the appeal would be against that decision, and the local authority's position on that appeal would be set out there as per its reasons for refusal. Obviously, you can potentially modify that later down the line, but it would be expected that the appeal would be on the basis that they would be saying the appeal should succeed because the local authority's reason for refusal 1 was wrong because of X, Y, and Z. The position that we're in now, and I completely understand the points that obviously the thrust of the previous meeting was that members were not obviously voted not to approve it and started to debate on what basis they might refuse it. The position we're in now is that no decision was actually taken as to actively to refuse it and on what basis. And so the appeal against non-determination is just an appeal that isn't against any particular stance that the authority has taken. So whilst there obviously was lots of comments in the debate about various objections to the scheme, you as a committee didn't nail your colours to any particular masts in terms of saying these are the reasons for refusal. So what needs to be done now is that a decision needs to be made, either to say we don't put forward any putative reasons for refusal, or we do, and these are what they are.
So
That's basically.
Yeah, so would it make a difference if you had a vote for refusal as well as the vote that was lost?
Sorry, can you say that again? I missed that.
If we had a second vote after the first vote, which was for approval, if you'd taken a second vote at the time for refusal, but then not given reasons, would that have made a difference?
Yes, because it would have been an appeal against a refusal, and then you would have needed to come forward. You would have needed to come forward with those reasons.
Yeah. If we had voted to refuse at that meeting without reasons, then we would not be in a it would have been it wouldn't have been a strong refusal. There wouldn't have been reasons. I mean, the applicant would turn around and say, well, they voted to refuse, but they didn't say why, and which is why we deferred the meeting to come up to formulate the reasons, because what we had was were a lot of nebulous comments without any formulated reasons. If we decide to defend the appeal now, we need to decide, and we vote to defend. We need to be voting to defend the appeal on grounds. So we need, within this discussion, to be solidifying grounds upon which people may wish to defend the appeal. It may be that the committee will then decide whether or not it wishes to defend the appeal or not. And if it does decide to defend the appeal, we will then vote again on whether we're defending on those grounds. But we need to come up with the grounds really before we decide whether or not to defend.
Yes.
Is that clear?
It's the merits of the reasons why the development is unacceptable and contrary to the development plan need to inform the decision as to whether we are defending the appeal or not. It's not good enough to say we're defending the appeal, but we don't know why.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need to be able to defend it on properly arguable grounds that indicate that the development is contrary to the development plan, or are other material considerations that would justify a refusal of permission.
And we just heard a reason from Councillor Johnson, where he talked about the climate and nature emergency grounds, which, if you recall the last meeting where we met with Annabelle and Rob and discussed this, I believe that Annabelle was indicated that they were potential possible grounds. Councillor Champion, your hand is up next. Charles.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so they've put an appeal because the council officers haven't asked for an extension, or they did ask for an extension up until the 31st of March, and the applicant or his agent didn't agree to that extension. Obviously, the planning officer asked for an extension to the 31st of March, probably for a number of reasons, because we are still outstanding information on ecology, I believe. They haven't had a full report done again. My reason at the meeting was the balance of heritage. And I mentioned that about the conservation officer actually being against this scheme. Is the balance of heritage and the ecology against what would be a gain? And the planning officer decided that the gain of actually 6,000 jobs or 4,000 jobs is higher than the heritage loss and the ecological loss. Now, as a committee, we decided that that balance was probably not right. So if we're going to get a planning gain, if that's going to be in 20 years' time, that's not really a planning gain, whereas the harm is instant. So that was my reasoning.
Okay, thank you, Charles. I noted that. Anyone else want to? Any of our three advisors want to comment on that? No. Rob. Sorry, you have your hand up. Yeah. You're muted, Robert. You're still muted, Robert.
Sorry, just to take a step backwards, noting Councillor Champion's comments on there. Like I said, I think there's obviously some procedural concerns in relation to the committee decision, etc. on there. But in terms of where we are now, I think that's we need to establish that's the baseline at the moment on there. So in terms of our advice on there, it would be admissive for us not to put all the options in front of the members on there. And I think that's a key to look at. We're looking at procedural elements from just an independent view on there, giving that advice to members on there. It is fact of matter now that we have to make a decision, or members have to make a decision on those elements on there. So it's just to go back to that point in essence.
Thank you, Robert. Councillor Champion, you still have your hand up. Do you want to come back?
Yeah. Would Pedro take into account the initial vote? Would they be made aware of the initial vote? Even if we go back, well, if we say, right, well, this appeal, we're not going to fight it because really they didn't agree to an extension, and therefore we should have actually come to an agreement. So we're not going to fight this appeal, but actually this committee didn't want this scheme to go through. How much weighting would Pedro actually give our committee?
Well, I think certainly it's something that I'm sure the inspector will or could be made aware of. It would be, the position would be that the council had had the opportunity to approve the scheme and had declined to take that opportunity. And so it might be inferred from that the council did not, well, it would be inferred from that the council as a majority did not support the development, otherwise they would have approved it. But beyond that, and obviously it'd be a matter for the inspector how much weight they placed on that, but beyond that, because there aren't any specific reasons for refusal, the inspector wouldn't really have any way of knowing on what basis the committee had decided not to approve it. Obviously the officers were recommending approval. That will be something the inspector would take into account and will do anyway, because that, the developer can rely on what officers said in the committee report and say, well, look, the officers recommended that this scheme should be approved. Okay, the members didn't accept that, but we don't know on what basis or why. So that would be, I suppose, the position.
Thank you, Annabelle. Ian, I propose to jump you at the moment because you've already spoken once, and I'll take people who have yet to speak and then come back to you. Councillor Ernest, Anthony.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just want to remind members, because it was some 10 weeks or so ago when we were talking about the application in the early stages, that at the very outset of the application being discussed, we were advised that PEDU had, or at least Welsh Government had called in the application. And so we were at a situation where we were going to talk about an application in front of us, our model farm, and yet we'd already been told, if I remember rightly, and I'm open to correction, that PEDU had called it in, and that effectively pulled our legs from underneath us, because we were talking about something over which we knew at that stage we would not have a lot of input because of the appeal process which has been discussed earlier. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of that situation, Chairman, because it may well have shaped the minds of the members and not the officers, but it would shape the minds of the members at that time. That's all I need to say at the moment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Anthony. Mark, sorry, James, rather. Do you want to comment on that? James?
I'm really sorry. My daughter came in with stuff gushing out of her eye, so I missed a little bit of that. So would you mind repeating it, Councillor Ernest, or summarising, and I'll.
Yes, I'll summarise in a question.
Sorry.
If my recollection is correct, at the outset of the discussion of the item on the agenda and the planning agenda on the 1st of March, some 10 weeks or so ago, committee were advised at an early stage, and it's a long time ago now, that the application had been called in by PEDU. And therefore, my point is that the members then were looking at the application whilst bearing in the back of their minds that they were already in an appeal situation.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's slightly different. So what we'd had was what's called a holding direction, which basically means that in the event that the council were minded to approve the application, then the Welsh ministers may call it in to reconsider it or to take their own view on it. It doesn't mean necessarily that they would have done so, but it just meant that had we voted to approve that application on that night, that we wouldn't have been able to issue a decision notice the following day or on completion of the Section 106 agreement. We'd have had to have waited to see if either Welsh Government said, no, we're happy, we don't want to call it in, or yes, we're going to call it in and we'll tell you and we'll make the decision instead.
Yes, thank you very much for correcting me. A holding decision, I absolutely concur with that. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, it's kind of similar, I think, to what's happening with the Ysgol Derry 2, where that's being considered as well by PEDU. Right, next who hasn't spoken is Councillor Hodges.
Thank you, Chairman. Interesting debate so far. I'm looking forward to getting towards the nub of the debate, which is what our position is and how we take it. I'd like to enter into evidence, though. I mean, I voted not to accept the officer's recommendations on this back in March because the scheme, in my mind, is wrong. So I'd like to enter into evidence in support of our previously stated position against this application, the Council's unanimous vote on the climate emergency in 2019 and the threat to its wildlife in wildlife protection in 2021. The latter was moved beautifully by the then Deputy Leader of the Council, Councillor Liz Burnett, now the Leader, and the then and still member for St Augustine's, Councillor Neil Thomas. He smiles. It committed the Vale Glamorgan to no net loss in biodiversity. I would be interested to hear how acceptance of this scheme would save us from that position. Thank you.
You're quite right. I did second the nature emergency motion, and I believe that with the move to I don't believe that a lot of farms are nature conservation areas. They are where they use a lot of chemicals, they use a lot of weed killers, they use a lot of insecticides, and where you have monoculture fields, that doesn't
model farm, Chairman,
including model farm, where a field of poppies sown for seed is a monoculture field. It doesn't encourage biodiversity. What would have happened would have been a large tranche of the land would have been transferred to Porthcurry Park, and that would then have become part of the nature conservation project that's going on at that park, and almost half again, I think, increase the park size by almost half again with nature protection, which is why I voted the way that I did. Next, who hasn't spoken, is Councillor Williams.
Thank you,
Eddie.
Chair. Yeah, I'm usually quite concise, aren't I? So I'm hoping I can make sense when I speak. On the original discussion, when we made a decision to not approve Ross's recommendations, one of the reasons why I was voting for it at the time was that, firstly, it was the LDP. We know now currently we're in a process of revising that LDP. However, that is a process that hasn't gone through its full cycle yet. So I was stuck with the LDP's current policy. So that was one of the reasons. One of my other reasons for siding for it was we talk about the Vale has got an increase in population, and yet we're not putting aside areas of employment, and also this was an opportunity to bring in an economic benefit. Other reasons that I thought, which was discussed during that meeting, were the conservation heritage, and I thought valid reasons, and the fact that the conservation officer would disagree with it, I thought on balance, okay, I can accept that as a maybe in comparison to the other items, the planning matters. When it came to the ecology piece, that is a major challenge at the moment, particularly as others have already indicated. The policy changes have come in. We are looking at protecting biodiversity and et cetera, et cetera. But within the plan, there were mitigations, and we've set aside areas. And you've indicated, Chair, about the farm itself. For me, they were given an option to move, and so they would be able to continue doing what they were doing, regardless of the type of farming that they purport. The other reasons that we were putting through for refusal were things like highways, drainage, and viability. And there are areas I thought, okay, they could be reasons, but this is where, okay, the decision was made not to accept the officer's recommendations, and quite rightly so. The officers can't then suddenly say, well, I'll give you reasons to refuse it. So we've got this external advice, and in my view, the external advice has been quite objective in that they've looked at those, particularly the conservation, the ecology, highways and drainage viability reasons, because let's be honest now, the LDP is, you can't argue against that. So they've come up, the objective advice has given us two reasons that would be valid that we could probably refuse the application, and they are the conservation heritage and the ecology on balance. So they're the two pieces that if we're going to go anywhere that we can discuss. And I just need to remind members that they were making comments about things which would not stand up in an appeal or in a case of...
Chairman, point of order.
Let me finish. What's the point of order? I'll let you say what the point of order is first.
Well, thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Eddie. All the reasons you've given for why you supported it back in March were not accepted by committee, and you were voted down. So I thought tonight we were discussing whether we're supporting a stance against the appeal and the reasons if towards that if we did.
Right. Okay. Can I
Chair,
rule
let me
on
just finish.
Can I rule on that? Just a second, Eddie. It is acceptable to give reasons for why people did not support, or so rather did support officers' recommendations at that time. It is part of our consideration now. The fact that there were that our advice is that there are only really two substantial possible reasons for defending the appeal is relevant to this discussion. Eddie, if you'd like to finish.
Yeah, thank you. And that was the basis. I did need to sort of clarify why I did make a decision, because clearly this is a public people in the public view want to know why I make my views, and often I don't actually explain them. I just make my, put my vote. So here I am, sat here. I'll accept the committee's decision, but I want them to consider the matters that the objective advice that we've been given is the conservation heritage and the ecology, and then we bring that to a decision on what we do, whether we go for appeal or otherwise. I will have a view. My view is, I am concerned that with the fact that PEDU have got it on hold, that for us to start saying we're going to refuse and then end up with court costs, I mean, we don't know that. I mean, we've heard that in the past. I just know that that will be costly if we as a council utilise public money on that basis. So I am concerned on that basis, but I am happy to listen to the rest of the committee on how they're going to deal with the two items, the objective advice we've been given. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Eddie. Next person who hasn't spoken, sorry I'm jumping people, is Councillor Stallard Caddis.
Thank you. I think if we do allow agricultural land in the Vale to be lost to facilitate projects like this, we wouldn't be doing our duty by future generations. And I think any, a battle or any debate during the appeals process would have to reflect things like the Climate Emergency, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and that might not fall neatly into a particular planning category, but that doesn't mean it's not a material consideration. So I think there would be grounds to fight the appeal lodged. I'm a little bit uneasy about spending local authority money on that, and I'm wondering whether I don't know whether there's a cheaper way of doing it from our point of view, whether involving the Welsh Government in, writing to Julie James as an individual, as a group of councillors. Are individuals allowed to make presentations during the appeals process, or do we have to do it formally as a local authority? I don't know what the rules are, but I think we would be in test case territory. But you think back to things like the Relief Road, that was dropped. I presume that was in lots of different development plans. But we managed, well, that didn't happen because it didn't pass the good ancestor test, or for whatever reason. Obviously, that's quite a controversial example, and not everyone on this committee might agree with that. But to my mind, this would be test case territory. But I just don't know how, whether we are the right body then to pit ourselves against Legal and General.
The situation is, I think, that the possibility for Legal and General to ask for costs remains. That is there. And if they did that, they will be going with very expensive barristers and very expensive advisors, and we would then be picking up the costs on that as well as whatever costs we expend in fighting our own defence.
But what I'm asking is whether, is there anyone on this call who could answer the question I asked as to whether individuals...
Annabelle, what would be your take on that?
Sorry, just...
Or James, James, you had a hand up.
Yeah, I mean, the principles for, as I've said, the principles for an award of costs are that a party has acted unreasonably, and that unreasonable behaviour has caused the other party to have wasted expense in the appeal process. So an example of unreasonable behaviour can be either procedural, but we're not really in that situation at the moment as something changes, or substantive. And that's what we need to be mindful of at the moment. And substantive unreasonableness, for example, would be arguing an objection to the scheme which has no merit. which means that the appellant is put to the wasted expense of having to respond to a case which is unmeritorious. So that's why it is always important. This isn't just to do with an appeal against non-determination. It could be if we were refusing any scheme that somebody could appeal. It's always important to ensure that the reasons for refusal are able to be properly substantiated.
And I think then in respect of your other question, Caris, so there's what's called a Rule 6 interested party. Yeah. So any party who has an interest in an appeal is able to write to PEDU and notify them of their interest within a set period of time prior to that appeal to say, we're an interested party and we would like to make representations and potentially cross-examine witnesses of the appellant, and that can be done by individuals or groups or any other party can apply for that. I'm not sure to what extent that's always granted, but I would say generally that would be granted if there was, for example, a local pressure group or an individual who wanted to challenge in the event that the local authority chose not to. Or we have had appeals where we've had Rule 6 parties come in where the council has been challenging the appeal. You can still have additional people coming in to become part of that through the Rule 6 process.
Are we in that period at the moment then?
Yes, I think it's, well, we're not in it yet because the appeal hasn't technically started. Okay. So PEDU will notify when the appeal is actually live. So they've got a backlog at the moment that they're trying to work through. And I think we're thinking it's almost half a year, isn't it, Rob? They're behind at the moment on these types of applications. So I think the notification for a Rule 6 party, it's something along the lines of 4 or 6 weeks prior to an inquiry. Okay. So it's quite late in the process. You can do it, but they'll take them earlier.
So potentially late autumn.
Yeah, PEDU are currently 24 weeks minimum with registering, especially major applications for appeals.
So,
thank you, Rob.
And just one quick question then. The argument that we should be producing more food locally for ourselves to reduce the carbon cost of feeding ourselves in the future, and obviously the planning policy framework should protect agricultural land on that basis, but I don't know whether that's planning grounds for refusing the application.
To my recollection, it's just apologies, I'll have to look this up, but it was the grade of the agricultural land was discussed during the actual meeting. I don't think it was grade 1, 2, or 3.
It's not, but it could be.
It's just a point of a fact of matter in essence on there that there was in the report, and it's so it's not protected under those policies on there.
No.
Thank you. Right, of the hands that remain up, if you we're back now to people who've already spoken. Councillor Buckley, Ian, you want to come back in?
Thank you, Chair. The meeting we had in March, all the questions and the arguments went through, answered some questions, obviously didn't answer them all. The vote went against approving, and as I remember it was deferred because we couldn't determine a reason for it. So don't we have to determine our reason now before we have a vote if we're going to appeal?
It kind of goes with it. It's a difficult situation, but yes, if we vote to defend, we need to be voting to defend on certain grounds. And at the moment, the only grounds that we've been given are from Councillor Johnson, which is the climate and nature emergency grounds, and that's supported by Councillor Hodges, and from Councillor Champion, the heritage and ecology grounds. So those at the moment would be the grounds to defend the appeal upon.
So if we vote to agree, then can we vote to see if we're going to appeal it?
No, we vote first to say whether we're going to defend, and if we're going to defend it, we basically are saying that we want to defend it on those two grounds.
Right. Thank you. That's
at the moment.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if we vote to defend, if we vote not to defend, then it doesn't matter. We don't need reasons or anything like that. If we vote to defend, and the majority decides to defend, then at the moment we're voting to defend on the grounds of ecology and conservation and heritage. Yeah. Mark, Councillor Wilson, your hand is the next up.
Thank you very much, Chair. I mean, I think it's interesting debate that we've had, although it's somewhat a rehash on what we had last meeting in March to determine its application or not, as the case may be. Now, obviously, there are grounds for and against. You know perfectly well what I said last time. I'm not going to repeat what I said last time. But I do think we need to conclude this sooner, because we do seem to be going round in circles. So I think we need to go for 2 votes, whether we decide to contest this appeal. And if we decide to contest it, what are the grounds for contesting it? So I'd like to ask the chair to propose that we have 1 vote now. Obviously, it's up to you, Chair. You may want to bring the speakers before, but I think we should go to the vote and just determine as to whether we're going to defend this hearing, whether it's going to be late autumn or not, as the case may be.
Yeah, I'm keen for everyone to get as much say as possible on this, because it is a controversial matter, and I certainly would not want to limit discussion. Annabelle, where do we stand on that, on Councillor Wilson's proposal motion?
Well, obviously, my only point was that if you are minded to vote to defend the appeal, that decision should be informed by the reasons why you're deciding to defend the appeal.
Yeah.
Whilst we could draft them afterwards and agree on the exact wording and things afterwards, it's important that councillors, in making a decision to defend the appeal, know why they are defending it. Not simply saying we're defending it, but let's work out afterwards some reasons why, because you know, the underlying merits must inform that decision.
Thank you. I will take the other 4 people who've got their hands up, who have all spoken before. Could I ask you though to be brief? Councillor Perry.
Yes, very quickly. Planning Policy Wales 11 shouldn't be carrying more weight than the LDP because it's a newer document. And I said earlier, LDP is based on Planning Policy Wales 9. The LDP, which we keep talking about, proposed a new road to junction 34 of the M4, I do believe. Now, Welsh Government policy in interim has changed, and that road will not be built. Therefore, the existing road structure, which is already creaking and already suffering from excess road noise, which is both the A48 and the A4232, which is a concrete road, that's going to put more traffic and more noise onto that existing infrastructure. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration as a planning thing. I'm concerned that there's a lack of leadership, because we said that third parties might come involved, and if we decide not to spend public money, then the public have got to have a whip round and raise money themselves. And then you ask yourselves, well, why are we here if not to test this on behalf of the public? So I think I'll make myself clear now that I will vote in favour of public money being used to look at this case, rather than shift responsibility back to individuals within the community who might wish to defend, as we're calling it. I think that, we employ lawyers. That's what we're here for. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Kay, same thing with you, please.
I shall be brief. Yes, I just wanted to show my agreement for the comments made by Councillor Champion and Councillor Johnson for the reasons why this application was agreed to be refused initially, and they are still my grounds for why this application should be refused, and I haven't changed on that. And I think both of them gave a very good account of what those reasons are. I would also point out that I think it would be very unusual for this committee to have had an application come before it, or that was then sent to appeal by the applicant. Therefore, non-determination has come before this committee before, and officers have asked us, when a non-determination has taken place, for us to make a determination so that when the appeal is heard, the person hearing the appeal knows what we as a committee think about that application. And that's what we should be doing this evening.
Annabelle, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah,
because,
I mean,
that is a possible.
Yeah, I mean, that is essentially what we are doing is this evening is saying that if we were in a position to make a determination on the application, would we be approving it? Well, we know that's already been to a vote a no, or would we be refusing it? And if so, on what basis? The option of the do nothing option, which I think is there because it is an option that you do have because they've appealed against non-determination, which is essentially a neutral option, which is not to say we're approving it, but to say that we're not actively going to play a part in the appeal, and we are simply going to have a sort of neutral position on it. Now, I understand councillors may feel that that goes against how they felt at the previous meeting, in which case they will need to vote to actively participate in the appeal. Yes. So, yeah, we're simply saying that you're not, if you had a position where there'd been appeal against non-determination and there'd been no committee meetings at all, then you're quite right, you would be asked, if you were determining it, would you approve it or not? Yes. And if not, on what basis? We're in a slightly different situation because you did have a meeting where a motion was put to approve it in accordance with the officer's recommendation, and that was defeated. But the options that we're giving you now are either you say, if we were determining it, we'd refuse it, and these are the reasons.
Yes.
Or we're saying there is another third way, which you may not want to do at all, but we're just simply advising you that that is an option available to you to say, let the appeal run, and we simply don't spend any money on it or participate in it.
Thank you for that. Surely, Chair, that's not what we're here for. Surely, as a committee, we are here to make our views known, not to sit back and say, we don't have a view, when we clearly do have a view.
No. What we are deciding now is whether or not we are making. We've made clear throughout this meeting that people have a view on the merits of the application and what the possible reasons for refusal are under planning law. That doesn't mean that we necessarily have to decide to defend the appeal. The appeal could still go to PEDU, and the decision can be put in their hands. They will be made aware of what we've said, and they will have access to this. But we don't necessarily have to actively defend it. Councillor Champion,
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, I was just going to say I agree. I mean, it's always open to a local authority to decide how much public money they wish to spend on anything, and whether it is in a cost-benefit analysis something that they want to prioritise. Obviously, this has quite significant financial implications. Even if we act completely reasonably, there will still be expenses for the local authority in participating in any appeal. That's why there is an option to say, you see what our position is, but we're we're not going to prioritise this. We're going to take a back seat on it. So that's effectively the kind of do nothing option.
Yeah.
But I understand many members may feel very strongly that the position would have been to refuse, and there are good reasons, and they want to, fight those reasons as much as they can, and that's obviously a decision that's entirely open to you as well.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Champion, yours is the last hand up, and then I shall support Mark's motion to go for a vote. Councillor Champion.
So they basically said that us as a council haven't come to a decision. And the reason why we haven't come to a decision is because at the meeting, we couldn't get the advice from our officers, and we then had to go away. So there is grounds to fight the fact that we take more time to come to our decisions. So surely we need to fight this to say, there is a reason why we haven't come to our decision. And it's 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 20 weeks. That's because we need to get this process right. So that is a very good argument to fight this appeal, really. We need to say that we don't believe that our council has not come to a decision for any other reason, but for this committee hasn't been able to come to a decision. That's what I've got to really say.
Thank you, Councillor Champion. Right, before we move to the vote, is there anybody from our experts wishing to comment? Or in that case, we'll move straight to a vote. We are voting on whether to defend or not defend the authority's position at appeal. A vote for will be voting to defend. A vote against will be voting not to defend. Is that clear? Mark, can you take us through the vote then, please?
No, sorry, Chair. Could you just go through that again so I'm absolutely clear?
Right.
Thank you.
If you want to defend the authority's position at appeal, in other words, you want us to actively defend the appeal, you will be voting for. If you do not want to actively defend the appeal for whatever, then you'll be voting against.
Thank you.
Mark.
Chair, just to check procedure, I just want to make sure that obviously we've had the motion has been seconded.
Yeah, I seconded.
Right, that's fine. I just want to double check.
I said that
He did say that.
Just before Councillor Champion spoke that I was going to support Mark's motion.
No, that's
take
fine
it to the
then.
vote.
Yeah, I just want to double check. Right, so we'll go through the motion you've just laid out, Chair. We'll do this alphabetically by the committee member. So the first person we have is Councillor Bruce.
For to defend the appeal.
Thank you, Councillor Bruce. We go then to Councillor Buckley.
For.
Okay, Councillor Buckley. Thank you. Councillor Cave.
For to defend the appeal.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Champion.
For.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Cope.
For.
Thank you, Councillor. Go on then to Councillor Drake.
For.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ernest.
Or to defend.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'll just double check if Councillor Gilligan here.
Yes, I am. For.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Hodges.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Obliged. For.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Payne.
For.
Thank you, Councillor. And then we go on to Councillor Perks.
Abstain.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Perry.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Stallard. Councillor Stallard, can I have your vote, please?
O blaid, 4.
Thank you very much, Councillor. On to you, Chair.
I'll abstain too.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Councillor Williams.
Abstain.
Thank you, Councillor. And then finally, we have Councillor Wilson.
Abstain.
Indeed, thank you, Councillor. I'll just tally the votes. We have, my reckoning, 13-4 and 4 abstentions, Councillor, Chair.
That's my count as well. Right, we now then have to formalise our reasons. We have the two proposals from, or the two mentioned in the discussion before. We have two valid possible reasons for our fighting this appeal, and that's on the climate and nature emergency grounds and on the heritage and ecology grounds. Now, we need to draw up a formal way in which to say that we can either support or not support. Rob and Annabelle, are you in a position to come up with a wording that might be helpful?
Yeah, I think it's really for Rob.
Yeah.
So in terms of the objections proposed on there, I think we have the moment ecology, conservation and heritage, and then we have the climate emergency element on there. In terms of the wording of the climate emergency, whilst Councillor Johnson spoke well on there, in terms of the specific reasons for the reasons rather than the wider climate emergency on there, I'd like to sort of go into that element a little bit more, just to enable us to ensure that we are being precise on that element rather than just the wider climate emergency element on there. Because in terms of the Future Wales Plan and in terms of Planning Policy Wales, which has been mentioned, Planning Policy Wales 11, there is a balance in terms of economic social elements on there that we need to be considered in that matter. But in the first instance, should we turn to the ecology element on there? And from previous discussions and members at the previous meetings, it appears clear to me that the council itself and that the concern raised in terms of ecology related to the fact that there was an absence of up-to-date preliminary ecological appraisal, a PEA for short an acronym. The proposed development fails to appraise the biodiversity interests of the site. Now, I think in terms of the policies that we'll be looking for on there, policy SP1 delivering the strategy, MD2 design of new development, criterion 10, MD9 promoting biodiversity, and MG19 sites and special and species of European importance of the LDP are relevant. But there is also advice within the authorities, supplementary planning guidance, biodiversity and development, and additionally then the national guidance contained within Planning Policy Wales 11. In terms of the wording of the reason for refusal, the question is whether members are looking to actually have the specific wording or they would like to vote on that as a separate matter.
I'd be open to the actual wording of it to be. I mean, the tenor of what we want to say is fairly clear, or what the committee want to say is fairly clear. In that there are you cited the various pieces of legislation and planning guidance and the rest of it that would be appropriate for this. I can see that we really just need to support defending the appeal on those particular grounds. Before I say anything more, though, Councillor Champion, you have your hand up again.
Yes, I was just going to say, in a normal run-of-the-mill, the committee make a decision, and then our officers write up and send the letter, which is the final report or whatever, to the applicant. So isn't that what would normally happen here?
That's kind of what it is, but we need to be clear, I think, on what we're asking in this case our advisors to do, because I believe they'll be the ones, or James maybe as well, will be the ones who draw up the document that they're going to be sending to PEDU in this case, because that's and to LNG.
In that case, Neil, perhaps in terms of the ecological element, if my interpretation of the members' view on this is, as I've said, if I read out just the principal line, in essence, the objection is there, and as pointed out, we can then, the actual minutiae of the reason for refusal or how we'll defend that can be put forward at the appeal, which is at a later date. So in terms of ecology, it's just to agree where the members concur that it's the absence of an up-to-date preliminary ecology appraisal. The proposed development fails to appraise the biodiversity interests of the site. Therefore, the proposed development fails to incorporate, conserve or enhance biodiversity interests, as those biodiversity interests have not been quantified in the first instance, would be my recommendation.
And is against MD8.
In terms of policies, it would be SP1, delivering the strategy, MD2, design of new development, criteria 10, MD9, promoting biodiversity, MG19, sites and species of European importance of the LDP, and additionally SPG, a supplementary planning guidance, biodiversity and development, and then national guidance contained within planning policy Wales.
That seems to cover it. Is that acceptable to the committee? Is there anybody wishing to vote against that? No. In that case, I don't see that we need to take this to an actual vote on of members, as that seems to be acceptable. The decision's been made to defend, and if those who voted to defend are happy with those grounds, then that's okay. So that's what on the heritage side.
So in terms of conservation and heritage, as Councillor Champion alluded to when he spoke on there, it's my interpretation from the previous meetings and discussions we've had now that the authority wish to defend the fact that the proposed development, by virtue of its layout, scale and massing, would have a harmful impact on the setting of historic assets. The benefits of the scheme are not considered to outweigh the identified harm to the designated heritage assets.
Once again, is there anyone who finds that unacceptable? Are they happy with that? I see no hands. Annabelle, is that okay?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rob. In that case, I think we've reached a conclusion on this. Thank you all. I think it's been Councillor Bruce, you have your hand up.
Very sorry, but the hand didn't come up quickly enough. One other thing, I don't know whether it's useful, but there is no 106 or not enough 106 money for a development of that size. They were proposing such a small amount, which wouldn't actually go into the Roos ward. Just, I don't know if that would be. I
think that was not regarded as useful because they are giving so much land, or would have been giving so much land to the Vale.
But they're not giving they're giving it to Barry. They're not using money in Roos.
They're giving it to the Vale, which counts as part of the Section 106
viable
contribution. Robert, you got your hand up.
Yeah, it was just the one other element on there is obviously Councillor Johnson raised the objection in relation to climate emergency, which we haven't discussed. I think that needs to be discussed before the conclusion of the meeting, whether or not the authority want to pursue that as a reason for refusal.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for reminding me. Ian Johnson.
Yes, thank you, Robert. I mean, I think the point I was making earlier was, with regards to the changes that have taken place in Welsh Government policy and declaration of climate emergency in 2019, which post-date our adoption of the local development plan. And I believe, therefore, that in taking consideration of this, we've not taken that. We have not taken sufficient weight upon the declaration of the climate emergency and its how that has been considered through PPW 11 and Future Wales, and therefore this is and fundamentally, as I said earlier, this is about testing the extent of that. But I feel that's important to have something there which shows that we don't believe that this has been taken into sufficient consideration in determining. Does that make sense, Robert? Can you make sense of that position?
Councillor Johnson, I understand the wider climate emergency policies that were put through. In terms of reasons for refusal, it's been specific in relation to challenge at appeal, what the specific reason in terms of the climate emergency, how the proposed development would affect or the impact on X or Y. And that's the balance that I need to get to. And I think that's the only element as a wider, it's quite a large document in essence, and that we need to sort of pinpoint one element of it. Ecology, flooding, would be my view on that. And maybe that's something we could encompass within the ecology reason for refusal on there in terms of the climate emergency, because it does take into account biodiversity. We spoke about net gain already, although it's not adopted, it's not in policy at the moment. That could form part of that reason for refusal, or the wording for that reason for refusal.
Okay, I mean, I'd be interested to hear. I've got some other hands there. What other people want to say, who have had concerns on the same issues. I mean, for me, there are the issues that arise from this are related to the development over a large greenfield site. They're related to increases in traffic which are induced by this. They're related to increases in and therefore carbon emissions, increase in carbon emissions that come about because which are induced as a result of the fact that this is for the aerospace industry. Those are the sort of the main issues I think that relate to sort of the climate emergency and sort of in a consequent increase in carbon emissions as a result of this development. But I'll be interested to hear from James Doherty perhaps, who's looking at me, and from those also with their hands up.
Yeah. James, is there anything you want to come in on now?
I suppose I think, like Rob said, because it's a very broad document and a very kind of wide-ranging policy, that it may open it up. It's very difficult to pull out the specific issue with this particular site relative to sort of sound information as to which element is specifically contrary. And I think there's some question to a degree of to what extent the climate emergency policy and documentation, both locally and nationally, it constitutes sort of a material planning consideration, and to what extent it can affect the decision-making process. And I think there's some mixed appeal results based on climate emergency declaration reasons for refusal.
Welsh government.
I recognise that, James, and that's why we were careful earlier to suggest that sort of that actually we need to understand what the how far that goes. But in the case of this, this application, I think it's clear that we are building on a large greenfield site. It's clear, as we're talking about with the from nature side on the biodiversity, it's clear that it increases vehicles on the road, and it's it is a development specifically as referred to in our own conditions for the aerospace industry, which is obviously one of the largest growing polluters, and so I feel it stands strongly against where Welsh Government policy takes us. Just the correct form of words, I think, is the issue here you're looking for.
Thank you, Ian. Moving on, Councillor Perry. Ian.
Yeah, I think Ian just covered everything there really, and just to repeat, climate emergency and this scheme would have significant negative impact on the environment in terms of all the transport and of course the materials to build it. And as Ian said, it's also the aerospace industry, so that there's quite a few reasons on the climate emergency to have grave concerns about this proposal.
Thank you.
So thank you for putting it so well.
Yeah, Caris.
Yeah, I just think it's key for me that is one of the reasons. Again, it's to do with protecting agricultural land, because the value of agricultural land is going to increase if we need to, produce more food locally to reduce the carbon costs of feeding ourselves, and that's going to become more and more important. So it's the climate emergency for me.
Thank you, guys. Right, Rob, has that managed to crystallise your thinking?
Yeah, again, I completely understand that the councillor's position on there. What I would say, taking a balanced and an independent view on that, if you take any development, there is going to be traffic, there is going to be, in terms of materials mentioned by Councillor Perry, in terms of the land, again, I move back to reasons for the refusal that are justified in essence on there. And again, like I said, I think in the report, we'd already identified the land, the grade of the land, which is protected, which the land within the application site isn't a grade 1, 2, 3A on there. So I can come up with a reason to look to the reason for refusal. And I think it's based on the fact of the highways impact and the carbon emissions from the proposal that seem to be the key words, in the impact on the environment, because like I said, Future Wales Act and Future Wales Plan and the Planning Policy Wales 11 does highlight those as key sort of elements within the balancing decision in planning. So, I think I would need to go away and look at that independently and provide you with advice on there, with a specific wording on there would be my advice at this time, in essence.
Happy, yeah. Councillor Johnson, I think you just put your hand back up.
Yes, can I thank Rob for his work and efforts there? I think we'd appreciate, this has probably been a little bounced on him, and and it takes a bit of time to finesse some of those points. I think what's interesting is just the nature of this piece of conversation is almost in itself the fact that these probably haven't been considered substantively in the work so far on this application within the context of the climate emergency. So I think that it's one of the challenges naturally of a planning committee is that we're a group of decision makers, elected decision makers, but we are not naturally by no means the experts in all this and having the right words to hand for interpreting policy and government direction is, for me, part of the challenge of this as an application, that it seems to me to go against what it is we are told that government is doing, and naturally it's how that applies to the planning system, how that's interpreted by the planning inspector at PEDU, which is important, and the fact that we don't have necessarily a wider understanding or yet You've quoted to some cases having come forward so far. I'm not particularly au fait with a large number of cases or particular cases within the Welsh legislative context and how they operate. So I think you understand, Robert, the tenor of the conversation and the concerns raised by particularly myself, Councillor Perry, Councillor Stallard, and I look forward to seeing and working on anything that comes forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. James.
Yeah, I was just going to a quick follow up in terms of the issues around the climate change emergency declaration. I think that's kind of an overarching policy. We've got our Project Zero, and I think what we need to do in terms of giving weight and power to those will be for those elements to filter through to the policies we've got. So the climate change emergency document and declaration isn't in itself a material planning consideration as such. What we have got is a raft of policies and documents that kind of sit behind the LDP, which is our overarching document. And what the planning officers will have done in determining this application is judge those against the policies that we have that are our material considerations, that are the things that they take into account, along with other aspects and documents that are paid in. It may just be a case of those policies haven't caught up maybe with where councillors aspire to be in terms of what we want to achieve, and ultimately that's going to be a long process because of the nature of the breadth of what a climate emergency declaration will encompass, because it fundamentally will touch upon every aspect of council life to a degree, and it just hasn't found its way through to the planet. I think that's where the difficulty comes for Robert in terms of drafting it, is that those things, those big ideas, haven't necessarily filtered down into detailed points that you can say this development does not provide this, or it harms that, and these are the quantifiables as to how that happens. But in terms of something more generic, then it may be there, but obviously the more generic, the more difficult to sort of defend at a later date, I would suggest.
Okay. Anthony,
Chair, can I come in, please? It's something very important. I understand there's a committee meeting which involves a number of members here on this committee who go to education. Now, can we defer the education meeting for an hour while you consider this application? Consider this, because obviously you've got a vote coming up very soon.
We've got. I don't know if we're going to have a vote or whether we're just going to do it by acclamation, and I'm hoping we can finish this in the next few minutes. I mean, that's my plan. Can I bring Anthony in next?
Yes, Chairman, very briefly, I recall now, as I was saying earlier, it was 10 weeks ago, my concerns was access to Cardiff Wales Airport. You members may recall that I mentioned the 100 million or so that the Welsh Government has had to invest in the airport because the lack of patronage and so on. And one of the things is that the Vale of Glamorgan Railway line, there has been a provisional link to the airport which crosses the land, and I can't at the moment find in the various documents I've got here because not been time, but it's something that has been under consideration many years, is a railway link into the airport, and that line would go right through the middle of the site. I need to say no more, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're not going to be able to. What we're going to have to do is bring this lot back to the next committee, I guess, to bring Rob's wordings on this back to the next committee for us effectively to rubber stamp it. Is that right? Am I right in that assumption, Rob?
I think James will probably comment on it as well. But I think the principle's been established, the vote has been had, that the authority chosen to defend the appeal. There's 2 putative reasons for refusal agreed. There is a 3rd one which will come back to committee at the next committee for review and a vote on at that point. And you can vote on the wording of all of those elements at the next committee. Do you think that's a rational way to move forward, James?
Yeah, I was just thinking in terms of timings. Obviously, we have a committee meeting next Thursday.
Yeah.
So if we're able to bring that, because it's just the one reason left, if we're able to bring that, maybe we could add that as a chairman's urgent at the end, just for voting.
Yeah.
If
I'm happy to do that. If everyone else is happy with that.
and everyone else is happy, that seems to be
Yeah,
the most logical step.
I see thumbs up.
It doesn't cause any delay really from where we are now.
Yeah, I have one more person who wants to speak, and that's Sandra.
Sorry, Chair. I was only going to say what James just said, and is to bring it back to the meeting next week once we have all the wording for the last point, where we can discuss and vote on it then.
Yep, that's exactly what I was hoping to say. Yeah. Okay, in that case, if everyone's happy with doing that, and if Rob is able to do that for us in the time available, then I propose that that's what happens next. If everyone's in agreement, if nobody's got their hand up to say no, in that case, I'm aware that people want to get off to various to the education meeting, which is following this, and thank you all for what I think was actually a good discussion.
Chair, just a very quick one. I just want to double check earlier on, because we had a few sound issues with some members. The declaration of interest, I believe that was stated and no one gave an answer to it. Is that correct? Right. No, yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks,
there were no. Well, I mean, it's the same meeting effectively. This is the third thing. So what applied at the last meeting really applies at this, unless people's circumstances have changed. In that case, thank you all for your attendance, and I'll let you get off to your meetings or your childcare or whatever else it is you need to be doing. Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you, Chair. Bye.
Bye-bye.